Hey, what's going on? Welcome to AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking Angular Ivy. I know everybody wants to know more about this thing, so let's get into it. Say hi to our panelists today. Joining us, we've got Alyssa Nichol. Alyssa, how's it going?
Hey, glad to be here, everyone.
And we've got Bonnie Brennan with us. Bonnie, what's going on?
Hey, happy Friday.
Yeah, a little bonus episode this week. Mike, what's going on, Mike?
Aside from not feeling well, I'm excited to learn a little bit about Ivy.
Very much, very much. And our guest that's going to tell us all about it, Uri Shaked. Uri, how's it going?
Hello. Well, I'm having a little affair here with the T-Rex from Chrome. But other than that, everything is fine. Hey, T-Rex.
Are you making it jump?
Yes, you can see here. Jump. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Voice activated. I like that.
Hey, yeah, special effects.
It's been a minute since you've been on the show. Why don't you fill our viewers in for what you've been up to?
So much. I just released new blog post today about 3D printing, but actually it's not only about 3D printing. It's also about an interesting event in my life. There is a surprise inside the blog post, so you can find a link and read it on my Twitter and find what the surprise would be. Any guesses?
No, but can I spoil it on the show if I go and find it real quick? Kidding.
Yes, you can.
I don't know if anybody has a guess.
All right, so the audience will have to check out the blog post and see what there is a egg there, and there's something inside the egg. What's inside the egg?
All right, maybe somebody who's watching in our YouTube chat, whoever can be first to say it, can win our appraisal and I don't know. We'll give a shout out. How about that?
A T-Rex sticker. How about that?
Ooh, all right. Somebody said yolk. Is that what's in the egg?
It's a 3D printed egg. It's not just a regular egg.
Right. All right,
something under pressure.
I found what's in the egg.
You found it, Bunny.
That is so cool.
Thank you.
So what did Ariella think of that 3D printed egg?
She was like, wow. She really loved it because as I wrote in the blog post, she really loves the concept of Kinder eggs with the surprises inside. And when she opened the egg and found the surprise, she was like, wow, she was surprised. She didn't expect that to come in the egg. And she was like, wow, that's like the perfect surprise. That's exactly the way it's like.
Can we just spoil it? Can we do it?
I don't know. What does Mike say? I will let Mike decide here because he seems in a good mood today.
No. It's not my decision. It's not my news.
Oh my gosh, someone spoil it before I do.
But Mike, if they tell it on the show, you have to be happy after they tell it. You have to change your mood. Can we make it work?
I'll do what I can. Yes.
All right. So let's do this.
So you had a special 3D gift, and how did it go?
Wow.
Did she say yes?
She said yes. That's amazing. Of course.
Yay!
I'd love to.
That is so great because, you don't get people who are that smart and that romantic all in one package. So it's probably pretty smart that she said yes. That's pretty great. That's the nerdiest and the most romantic thing I think ever. It's great.
Thank you.
We were talking before this episode about like how upbeat and positive AngularAir always is, and maybe there's some lack of drama. Like this is going to be like the most upbeat and positive episode ever. So I mean, we're definitely not going towards that other realm.
I don't even remember what you were going to talk about. Now I want to hear all about her.
This is an episode about Ariella, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. Tell us everything.
Is
Well,
her
I bet.
name-
Oh, but we're.
Is her
Huh?
name Ivy?
Yeah, that's her
Yeah,
code
people
name.
do. I'm sorry. We'll take it offline with Ariella, and you should probably teach us because there's people watching that. And I do love Ivy. I was excited about that before I even found out about this. But offline, we want to hear everything.
All right. Well, let's then get down to business about Ivy. How about that?
Yeah, let's do it. It was a long introduction, but I liked the positive energies that it brought to everyone.
Well, that was fun, hiding a surprise inside of a blog post.
Totally.
Very cool. Very cool.
So, what is Ivy?
Wow, what is Ivy, you ask? So actually, let me ask you. I'm really interested to know, what do you know? What have you heard so far about Ivy? What's your impression before we get into the nitty-gritty details?
If you're asking me personally, I had a wonderful teacher explain me all about Ivy. That person is you. In another blog post that you put up about Ivy, I read through that, so I have a pretty good understanding, thanks to you, of not only what Ivy is, but also what the benefits are. So I guess you want me to explain and make sure that you wrote a good blog post. Is that what you're looking for?
I would love to.
I have not had a chance to dive into Ivy yet, so you can be our wonderful teacher today. The last time we met, we were talking, we were like nerding out over Bluetooth brainwaves, and we didn't even get into Ivy. So I'm pretty excited about this. I know what Ivy is, but I only know the helicopter view.
So I think it's like a new version of the rendering engine. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really confused on the timeline because, I'm not gonna lie, I've read a couple of blog posts and I totally was texting Mike one morning in bed because I found this blog post and I'm lying in bed and I'm like, oh my god, did Ivy hit and I didn't know and no one told me? Because this blog post was literally talking about it like it's already live, and so I had to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. So does anybody know what all the confusion about the release is? Mike was telling me that it's available to try out, but it's not launched.
It's not ready for prime time. They have been teasing us for quite a while on this Ivy thing.
That was exactly what I wrote. But I think before we're talking about availability, I think we should clarify a little bit about what Ivy is and what the benefits are. And then we can talk about, this is so exciting. When can we play with it?
I like it. Okay. So tell us, Mike, what are you most excited about with Ivy?
I'm here to ask questions.
Okay, I mean, Uri.
So basically, as Justin said, Ivy is a new rendering engine for Angular and also a new compiler. They go hand in hand. And I think we can start with the benefits. What does Ivy bring to the table? So it's amazing. It has so much things it brings to the table. Let's start with the high-level view, and then we can dive into the details. So in short, like TLDR, eventually it will help us to get smaller bundles, faster rebuild times. Whenever we make a change in the application, it will compile much faster. And then also getting rid of all those ng summary JSON and ng metadata JSON files that right now has to come bundled with every third-party Angular module or library distributed on NPM. So basically, get rid of a lot of the complexity that there is right now in the packaging solutions for Angular libraries, and get us smaller applications, faster applications, and better developer experience. Basically, everything you could expect from something new and shiny. So that's really in a nutshell. And to get a better idea of the philosophy behind Ivy, I think one of the more interesting things that I learned about Ivy when speaking with the Angular team and trying to understand their thought process, how they approach creating Ivy, is that they started approaching all the code base in a way that enables better tree shaking. So basically, it's not just right now you can get some things shaked away from the bundle from your applications if you don't use them. Like if you use Angular material and use only the checkbox, you will get a code for the checkbox, but you won't get a code for dropdowns. But that's not really a granular resolution. If you think of it, sometimes when you write smaller applications with Angular, or if you want to write custom elements with Angular, you don't use a lot of the features that the framework offer. Like sometimes you want to use ngIf or your favorite Bonnie, ng4, the replacement of ngRepeat. Or sometimes you want to use all the decorators like the query decorator that allows you to get the child elements of your component. And all these aspects of the framework add more additional code to your bundle. And up to this point, you couldn't take them away. Like if you included Angular Core and Angular Common, you had all this code in your bundle. There was no easy way to get rid of it. And that's not optimal. So now the new approach for Angular is to rethink how they build the entire framework. So every single bit of the framework will be tree shakeable. Not just in the level of like the module level granularity, but very granular tree shaking. And that's how they get smaller bundle size. And they had to change the way dependency injection works for that and the way the compiler works for that. And this leads us to the second thing, which is the faster rebuild times I told you about. So whenever you change the code for some component, you don't have to wait for the Angular compiler to go over the entire application and understand all the components and their relationships like you had to do today. Basically, the compiler will now be local, which means it gets a component as an input, and it creates a compiled TypeScript file as an output just for that component without having to look at the entire structure of the application and the ng modules. And we'll probably get later to the way it achieves that, but it gets as simple as the compiler is taking one source file, transforming it, writing the result to disk, and that's it. So whenever you change one file, only one file has to be compiled. And that works hand in hand with the ability of the compiler to get rid of the new compiler to get rid of those metadata and ng summary JSON, because now they have something really neat instead. Instead of generating those extra files to store all the metadata about your components, what their inputs are, what their outputs are, etc. Right now, Ivy just generates TypeScript files, TypeScript definition files, which include all that information. So the idea is instead of having two compilers, the Angular compiler that does all the input and output and validation of the component, and then TypeScript compiler, which does the validation of types, have TypeScript do both. So the compiler will just transform your components into into a file that TypeScript can ingest, and then TypeScript will just do all this as part of its type checking. So basically, we leverage the power of the TypeScript compiler instead of reinventing the wheel and doing double work, once in the Angular compiler and then in the TypeScript. So that was a quick overview of the benefits Ivy brings to the table. And I would love to hear what you think about it, and if you have any questions about
that. We have questions.
I have a concern first. I want to go first, Bonnie.
Go.
So there's a lot of great things there. Smaller bundles, faster builds, all those great things. As a developer and somebody who's using the framework, what do I need to do to take advantage of that once that's out? Am I going to have to change my application? Am I going to have to change my code or my templates to take advantage of all of that?
Okay, that's a great question, and I think I like the answer for that, because the answer for that is that you are not alone. There are, I think, a few hundred, if not more than 1,000 of projects within Google using Angular. And Google has this thing where they only allow their entire code base to use a single version of Angular. It means that the day Ivy turns on as default for Angular, all those applications will be immediately switching to Ivy, and they have to have their build passing, their tests passing, and they will be deployed to production the same day within hours. So basically, the moment the flag is switched, the Angular team has to make sure that all these applications work. And if they will have too many breaking changes, they will have a lot of work in that single commit that switches Ivy on, because they will also have to commit fixes to all the applications across Google that use Angular. Therefore, it's their interest to make sure that once Ivy is available and is switched on, the transition is mostly flawless. There could be a few little edge cases, and I'm sure they will address them. But basically, you and all the other projects in Google are in the same boat. So there is a good basis for assuming that Angular will take care of this.
That's beautiful.
So
that's the coolest thing.
What about if they want to try it out right now, though? Like, what process did you go through to play around with Ivy yourself?
So, a good question.
That was a very good question, Alyssa. I was wondering that.
Amazing question.
Because I'm waiting for you to like share your screen, like, you know, like show us, but you're saying we don't have to do anything different than we've been doing.
So basically, I would go with a cliche and show you that I have less hairs on my head, but you can see it on this angle. But actually, to be honest, comparing the process for trying out Ivy and the output of Ivy with the previous compiler versions, it's much easier. Ivy is much simpler. I think that sometimes you have to go through some level of complexity in your design in order to find the simplest solution. And I think Ivy is one step in the way there. So the compiler for Angular 2 was complicated, and it generated a lot of code. And then they tried to optimize it in Angular 4. And I think you can remember this, Mike, when they introduced the new compiler in Angular 4, almost nobody noticed. When I gave a talk last year in ngConf about Angular 4, I asked the audience, hey, most of you have already switched to Angular 4. Have any of you suffered any pains because of the switch? And there was only one guy raising his hand. So after my talk, I approached this guy and I asked him, what was the story? And basically, he did something really, really custom. He created some kind of shell app with different React and Angular components mixed in together with some kind of custom framework he created around this. So basically, he was the only one out of 200 people that was having some difficulties with the upgrades because he was doing something really very unusual. Um, so basically, Angular takes care of making those changes more or less transparent for the users, for the developers, and we have seen this in the past. But in the same time, I think they try to simplify things a lot, and that's what I like about this approach. Removing a lot of the complexity, making things smaller, more local, easier to reason about. And I think that I will show a quick example of how we just write Angular Ivy code working directly with the renderer. We are not going to write a template. We are going to write the JavaScript code that the compiler should have generated for us behind the scenes and see how simple it is, how simple the building blocks are. And Mike mentioned my blog post, and in my blog post, you can see how you can easily change one flag in the tsconfig file and see the output of the Ivy compiler. You can't really try. I haven't found a simple way to take a complete application and try it with Ivy. And the main reason is that most of the third-party libraries, as well as some of the core directives, aren't yet compatible with Ivy. They haven't been compiled with Ivy yet. So you have to go through hoops to make them work in the Ivy environment. But if you write code only using your own components, then that's super simple. But nobody does that, right? And
Before we kind of show some stuff, just to kind of give a brief kind of understanding of what we've got. When we talk about the renderer and the compiling stages, we're writing our markup, our HTML, right? We're writing our component class code, right? Our JavaScript, TypeScript code, and then at some stage, the compiler comes in and changes that code so that it can then run through this renderer, so that it can run in the browser, right? And tie in all those little things that we do, where we do the ngIfs, ngFors, any type of inputs and outputs, click events, those sort of things. There's this transition of the code the markup that we write that needs to get converted into JavaScript that then can run in the browser, right? And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about this renderer and the compile step and all that kind of magic that we as developers kind of don't face or deal with, right? And I really like what you said with this process that has kind of gone through with the compiler and everything that goes into that render, starting out very complex and working, and then getting optimized as we go along. Like what we'll see with Ivy as you dig into this and seeing how that optimized. And that's something that we do as developers, in every stuff that we build too. I mean, a lot of times we build something to get it working, and then we optimize it to get it efficient, right? And so, but I think it's important because I know once you dive into the stuff and we show, and one of the aspects with Ivy is showing that difference of that. And when we talk about the size and payload and things like that, showing the size that's needed to render that stuff that we wrote versus what it was pre-Ivy, right? And that's one of these big leaps that it does. So kind of want to throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks for the summary. So one more thing to say before we dive into actual Ivy. And that's going back to you, Mike. Another thing the Angular team has started working on, I think it's led by Pete Bacon Darwin, is a piece of code called ngCC, which stands for the Angular Compatibility Compiler. And the idea here is to be able to compile into the future libraries that were built for Angular 4 or 6, so they will be Ivy compatible. So right now, the situation is if you wanted to try Ivy, as I said before, you can't use third-party libraries because they were not compiled with Ivy. But ngCC will solve this basically by being able to transform those metadata JSON or ngSummary JSON files, at least one of them, into the new Ivy format for us. So we will still be able to consume libraries created for previous versions of Angular, and that should make the transition super easy, because even if you use Ivy, you don't have to wait until all the libraries that you use upgrade to Ivy. You can start using
what is it transforming? It's not transforming like the whole library. What did you say this in GCC is transforming? It's just like a file?
They're basically making it backwards compatible with all these random libraries that they didn't even write, which is amazing. That's so cool.
Basically, right now, libraries will come with all the metadata that gets bundled, all the information about the components, their inputs, their outputs, those ng summary, ng metadata, JSON files.
Okay.
And ngCC will transfer those into DTS, TypeScript definition file, which will be the new way for Ivy to enforce those constraints. So basically, doing the work for us. That's what we love about programming, right? We can get a computer to do our work.
So we all need to tweet at Peter Bacon Darwin and tell him thank you, is what you're saying.
We should tweet Peter Bacon Darwin love at least once a week, at least. Hey, so Frederick's in the chat with lots of good questions, and he wants to know if there's anything useful with web components. How does this tie in or relate to web components, or does it?
That's an absolutely great question. I've been asking myself as well. I don't know. I don't know still where this is going, but I can see that there is a very tight connection between what they do with Ivy and how this can be used to build very simple, self-contained, standalone components with Angular. And we are going to see it in just a moment, like how I just take an Angular component and sort of run it standalone. It will still use some part of the framework, but it feels much more self-contained than it used to be. So I'm not exactly sure about the plans, but it seems that this whole transition, the architecture of Angular applications is going through because of Ivy, walks hand in hand with being able to build elements, custom elements, and ship them with Angular as a smaller standalone unit. So I also want to get an answer to this question, but I'm very positive that this will happen eventually.
Yeah,
Frederick thinks that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's a mix of that tree shaking, right, and that size of the render and everything, getting that thing as small as possible for your web component delivery, so it just does what it needs to do without the high overhead of Angular, right? And that helps, is going to help that significantly.
And Frederick thinks that the backward compatibility, what is it, ngCC?
ngCC.
That would help with having multiple web components of different versions on the same page, which is a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that ngCC relates to the level of web components, because web components have all their interfaces work at runtime. I mean, you don't have to know at compile time that you are going to be using a specific web component. You just use that element and all the magic happens at runtime. So for the web component story, I'm not sure that ngCC will be relevant, but when you are still in the Angular land and you are consuming Angular component and you want to be able to get the feedback about how you use the component, to know that you didn't make any errors in build time, then ngCC is going to be super useful.
So are you going to show us?
Yeah, let's actually see some code. So let me see. Let me start with a slide that I just like. I will. Can we share the screen, Justin? Do I need to do anything, or is it just gonna happen?
Do the little green icon on the.
The one that said.
Share
the one that says screen share, right? Okay, I'm going to do this, sharing my screen. Let's see. Can you see yourself?
Yes.
Infinitely?
Yeah.
Infinite Justin. Woo! All right. And now I should have presented this. So
This is just
what
one of the many reasons I love you, Uri, because of the woo. You're just so fun.
sound effect. So this is what the older Angular compiler felt to me in a way. A very complicated machine where a lot of parts have to work together in order to produce something amazingly at the same time complex. I hope you can see the GIF while I'm speaking about it.
Yeah, we can. It looks good.
And I think the new compiler and renderer Ivy is more like this, where it does a very specific thing one at a time. And it's very good at that. All the complexity or most of the complexity gone. It's now simple, precise, and does what it's supposed to do. So this is the slide I wanted to be sharing. And I think the next thing we can do is actually start with showing you how I think it's the demo directory, yeah, Ivy internals, how to just enable Ivy and see the output of Ivy in your project. So I got here a new Angular project created with the ngCLI just a few hours ago. And it's just the boilerplate with app component that says, well, basically, welcome to app, here are some links, etc. And in order to get a taste of what Ivy looks like, I just go to the tsconfig and I do what developers are best at, which is copy pasting, and just paste this small snippet here. You can also find it in the blog post, which is Angular compiler options, enable Ivy through. And then all I have to do is just run ngC, and ngC will now compile my app template, which is what we have seen here, using Ivy. And then we can start seeing those side by side, like comparing the input, which is this HTML template, with the output, which we can find inside dist outtsc and the same paths, app src app, but this time the template is inside app.component.js. So basically, what Ivy does here, it takes both the HTML and the class, the component, and it merges them into a single JavaScript file, which we are going to see in a moment. And we are going to compare the HTML template with the output of Ivy. And this is the output of Ivy that also passed through the TypeScript compiler. So it's also compiled to JavaScript after. So are you ready for it? 3, 2, 1, Ivy! So we have the template on the left and the Ivy on the right. And you can see here this app component class, and you can see this simple assignment that put the word app into title. That's taken from the class. But what's more interesting is this ngComponentDef, which is a static property that has been added to the class by the Ivy compiler. And what it does, it basically calls I0, the defined component. Now you can see I0 repeats a lot of time. And if we check at the beginning of file, we can see that I0 is simply Angular core. The Angular core module is imported as I0. So in order to make it more readable, we'll just rename it to core. And now it's easier to read. So basically, we are calling a function from the Angular core module that's called defined component. And this function is basically the equivalent of the add component decorator that we had at the in the original class. So if you go to the class, this ngComponentDef is more or less the equivalent of this. So Ivy transformed this add component that we had to this ngComponentDef, and we can see the parallels just in a moment. So we can see a few, let me arrange the lines in a more readable fashion. We can see it has it gets 4 parameters. The first one is just the class type, and then it gets the selector, which is the one that was defined at the decorator level. And then it gets a factory, and this factory just creates a new instance of the class. This is where dependency injection would have been handled if we had any dependencies in the constructor of our class, but since we don't have, it's super simple. It just returns new app component. And then I think the interesting part is this template, where all the templates for like the HTML code is basically translated into this template function. And what we can see here is that we have one-to-one correspondence with the HTML code and the template instructions. So we have these cryptic functions like theta e, and you probably ask yourself what theta means. So does any of you know what theta would do? Why they use the letter theta here?
I thought that was a lowercase e.
Me too.
I'm confused.
Don't they use it to like indicate this kind of protected code sort of deal? Not
right. So
and now you have to teach us how to type that on our keyboards.
Okay, I'm going to show you one little trick that made me a millionaire. No, it just allowed me to type this letter.
Now I'm really excited.
I actually, at the beginning, I was also reading it as a little e, but then I realized it wasn't a little e at some point.
What made you think that's not an e? Because I'm still seeing an e, man.
Let's zoom in and see if you can see
right?
the data. Can you see the data now?
Yeah. Some
Okay,
people are blind, so
it's
thank
like
you.
a Pokemon ball.
Yes. Okay.
So what Justin said is true. It basically means this is private. You should not be using it. And as we are speaking, I suddenly had an insight. I think I know why they chose the letter theta. I mean, they could have chosen any other Unicode letter, including Hebrew letters and whatever. But I think the reason they chose theta is that it looks more or less, it resembles a no entry sign, right?
Ooh,
like the little,
that's
like
pretty
that's
clever.
True. Yeah. And you know what? If that's not why they meant it, that is why they meant it now. So.
Yes, exactly. That's the attitude. So basically, these are all like the defined component, and these functions are all private functions. And I think the reason they call them theta e, theta s is just to make the bundles smaller. But then we can use the magic of TypeScript. If we hover them, we can see the like the docstring for the original function and the name and the types of the parameters. And if we command or control click it, let's take the first one, the theta uppercase E, we can actually, wow, that's a tough one. But we can actually somehow, after clicking through it, get to the original function name. So as a matter of fact, theta E actually maps to element start. And then we can see this docstring which says this creates a DOM element, blah, 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 blah. So all these cryptic names are actually instructions that tell the renderer what to do. And theta E tells it, hey, I want you to create a div element. And I heard a question.
Yeah, I just want to geek out for a second real quick. Couple of things. I want to ask a question, and then I want to make a point. First, I want to ask our panelists how many, and just shout it out, how many of you have like looked before at the output rendered JavaScript of our components that we write to see this mix of HTML, CSS, and what used to be like pre-Ivy, right? Anybody?
No.
I have briefly.
No, I wouldn't do it without a guide.
So it was like complex, right? A lot of, I mean, it was, compiled, but it was cryptic and a lot of stuff, a lot of places, right? It was very hard to digest and debug and things like that. So that was actually one of the things we didn't mention earlier with the benefit of Ivy is this ability for us to debug a lot easier. And Uri is showing this right here with the fact that we can kind of dig through in the TypeScript land and see these methods that are called and trace this through. But we can also look at this code right now. And if we've looked at the other previous and we look at this now, this JavaScript file, it's a lot easier to kind of take in and understand what's going on.
So was it all just like numbers and symbols and stuff before? Like
it was a thing. I have a small confession to make. This year in ngConf, they had this challenge where you had to solve a series of riddles as a part of the conference.
Yes. And did you cheat? Did you cheat?
All right, I'm going to say this now. So the first part of the challenge was a website where you had to hit a secret code with your keyboard.
Yeah.
I think it was called the Kinoma or Kinomi code.
Konami. Yeah, it was the Konami code. Yeah.
And I figured that out, but when I type the code, it says, you're doing well, keep going, but it never occurred to me that you had to hit enter at the end in order to unlock this challenge.
Yeah.
So after trying a lot of variants, like with the keys and with the letters like A, S, D and stuff, I decided, okay, I'm a developer, this is code. I can just look into the code and try to find the code that matches the key sequence in order to determine what the key sequence was. And I spent about half an hour in the morning of the second day of the conference, instead of practicing for my workshop I had that day, trying to figure out my way through the compiled code. It was Angular 5, I think, at the time. Of this application.
Did you figure it out? Was it super hard to read?
It was super hard. It was so cryptic. After half an hour, I just gave up and I said, all right, it should be easier just to brute force. And then at the night of that day, it occurred to me that I should probably try to hit the enter button after doing the sequence, and then it worked. Like, it was so simple. But anyway, this was a real proof for me, a real life proof for me that the code for that was generated for Angular 5 was simply too cryptic to understand what's going on in the compiled code. And as Justin said, this is now greatly simplified. Like, I believe that even without me explaining all those instructions, you can probably see the relations between the input and the output. Like, you can see all the tag names and the text, and then there is a little boilerplate, but not too much. And I also owe you how you type the theta. So the easiest way is what we developers do all the time, copy paste. But then, since we work with you know what? I will save the second method for the next demo because I want to move on.
Something?
Yes, sure.
So I think that was a great question by Justin about looking at the old compiler or the output from the old compiler versus this compiler. But I think it's important to note that if you decide that you don't want to dig into this, as most of us, even on the panel, said, no, we've never looked at that output. This is some output that you're probably not going to be looking at again. Unless you do decide to go in and try and debug something else. But there's nothing in normal day-to-day Angular development that would say that you have to go in and look at the compiled output.
Totally. And I think before it wasn't even possible. Like, even if you had to do it at some point, you would probably have to resort to solving the problem, debugging the problem that you had using some other method. But now, if you do decide to, it's finally more approachable. So earlier, it was just totally unapproachable, and now it's one level more approachable. So I think even if you don't do this on the day-to-day, you can now do it if you want. And before, it was like totally over the head. Just for a quick glimpse at what the old code looked like. So this is a snippet from the old code, which had a lot of nulls, any, and you can still find bits of text and element names there, but it's like there is all this mess around it, and when it's minified, it's just a mess of brackets, square brackets, and parentheses, and simply don't. Anyway, where did my code go? Here we go. So anyway, this is like a quick demo of how we can easily look at the output of the compiler. And as Mike said, you usually don't have to do that, but now you can. And one more thing I want to say about this template function, you can see it has these if statements, two if statements, if ref &1 and if ref &2. And those are basically defining the two parts of the template. So the first part is the creation of the view. So this code runs once, and this code runs every time change detection kicks in. So basically, this is the new change detection mechanism. It calls all the template functions relevant to the component where the change occurred. And those functions basically reevaluate all the dynamic bindings. So in this case, we only have one binding, which is welcome to title, and it's reevaluated here whenever the change detection kicks in. So we also get a glimpse on how the change detection now works. And basically, this theta-t function is updating this element that we created here. We have the same number. The number is just an index into, I guess, some internal array where Angular keeps tracks on all the things you created in your view. And we are basically telling Angular, update this value with this expression. And Angular does the comparison itself. So Angular saved for us the previous value of this expression. And then when this change detection kicks in and this function is called, Angular compares this the new value of this expression with the value it previously saved. And if they are different, only then it goes to the DOM and updates this element number 2, which it created here. So everything is much simpler now.
Okay, that's really like get excited about this here, because I mean, think about it. We Mike, you mentioned like, well, maybe we won't touch this again, or we won't have to look at this again. But I mean, how many times have we hit stuff and gone, man, I would love to just breakpoint wherever change detection is happening, because I think there's some variable flowing through. What the heck's going on with my code, right? Like, and we put a breakpoint somewhere, we end up down some rabbit hole where we just can't diagnose, right? We have to trace back between multiple files to get our answer. This can kind of give us this anchor point, this entry where we could go there and see, oh, these are the things that are happening in change detection. What's my value? That sort of thing. So I don't know. I get excited about that possibility of making that life easier, right?
That's an excellent
Totally.
point. I believe Kara actually demoed that on stage at ngConf in one of the keynotes this year.
Yeah, like breakpointing in HTML, right?
Yes, that's amazing. Don't you think so? Like, I remember with AngularJS when you had this $digest that would go over all your listeners and magically compare things. And whenever I did $digest, I felt a little thrill in my body, because a little chill. I don't know if thrill is the right word. Because I didn't know what digest is actually going to do. It was doing so much stuff, and you couldn't really look inside digest. It was complicated code, and you had this digest cycle that ran your promises, did change detection, ran timers, and whatever. And it was a little bit scary to try to understand all the things that digest was doing whenever you called it. And now this is so much simpler. Even though the framework itself is much more mature and complex, these smaller bits are much easier to understand and ingest. So how many of you like Stack Blitz?
We all love Stack
We
Blitz.
love Stack Blitz.
So the next demo will be just showing you how we can, with Stack Blitz, do it yourself, Ivy. So we are going to start a new project. Yeah, and it's going to be easy, fun, and super simple. You can try it at home. Please do try it at home. And unlike what you would probably think I would do, you'll probably think I would start an Angular project, but no, I'm going to start a blank TypeScript project, no Angular. So this is going to be done from scratch without using all the setup of all the boiler of Angular, just the TypeScript application. We still have the boiler of TypeScript handled for us, but no Angular. And the first thing where I'm going to do is obviously what I love doing the most, delete code. I'm going to delete the code here. And so we are left with just this empty index HTML and with this CSS. And let's make sure we have a nice font for our body. And other than that, we are totally starting this from scratch. And we are going to start by, we have no dependencies because this is a new empty project, and we are going to import only Angular core, no Angular common, no Angular compiler, and obviously its dependencies, RxJS and Zone. And what we are going to do right now, we are going to take a component that looks like this and translate it to the Ivy language on our own. So let's call it a hello component, and it will have a title that says hello. Actually, it won't have a title. It will have a name. Please give me a cool name. I'm waiting for input. Alyssa?
Yes.
Okay, that's totally a cool name. So I'm going to import component from Angular core. And put here in the name Lisa. And I recently discovered that you have this nice emoji menu in Windows 10. So I'm going to attach a printer to Alyssa. I don't know why.
Nice emojis. Wait, did it put the emoji in the?
It did, but the font doesn't display it
okay.
super nicely. But I think it will be displayed well in the HTML page. We'll find in a moment. So basically, we are going to use this component. We'll call it hello world, hello Alyssa component. And we are going to give it a template that will say, hi, name. So this is our component. And obviously, in order to use it, we need to get a font a little bit larger so everyone can see what we are doing. We are going to need to put it in the HTML. Hello, I will copy paste because otherwise I'm likely to have. Did I type your name correctly, Alyssa?
Yes. Sorry. I'm so blind.
Yes.
I have to lean really close to the monitor.
You know, Ariella is an optometrist. If you need new glasses, she can set it up. I will arrange something after this call. So anyway, right now it's not displaying anything because we don't have, we only have Angular core. We don't have the Angular compiler. So this decorator is basically not translated into anything, and we just have a class that is defined and nobody is even instantiating it. And what we are going to do right now, we are going to create this ng component def as we saw the Ivy does, and create it in a way that this component could render using the renderer. So let's do it, and then I will show you how to render it. So we are going to do basically the same as we have seen with our code. We're going to define the static property on the class, and then call this, let's import Angular core as well. Let's import, I will make the font a little bit larger for Alyssa. Start core from Angular core. And then we are going to call this helper method that is called define component. And since it's a private method, it starts with a theta. And I don't know how I can type theta, but here is my second trick. I can use the autocomplete to get a theta. So I just autocomplete coded something, and it gives me the theta method.
I love it.
Yeah, a simple little trick that worth $1 million. And this function, as you may remember, gets a few parameters that correspond to the stuff that we had at the component decorators. So first of all, it gets just the type, which is the name of our class. Then we need to give it all the selectors. I'm not sure why it accepts multiple selectors, but this is for you, homework to figure it out. Then we need to give it a factory, which is how to create a component. Again, we don't have any fancy dependencies in the constructor, so we are just going to return a new instance. And most importantly, we are going to create a template. And this template is a function that will call all these fancy theta-e methods to create our view. And it gets two parameters, this rf, which we are going to eventually use when we want to differentiate between the creation stage of the component and the change detection, and ctx. Ctx will simply point to the instance of the component. Since this is a static method, we can't use this inside it. So ctx, we get it from whoever calls this render this template function, and it contains the instance of our controller. So basically, everything we have here inside our template is going to be available inside ctx. And we are going to create our template, super simple. All we need to do, need to create this h1 element. So we'll call this theta-e function and tell it to create an h1 element. And inside this element, we want to create some text. We will use theta-t. Thank you, autocomplete. And we'll just say there, hi. And then we want to get a name. So how would you go about getting the name? Where would you get the name from?
From the context.
Context.
Hi, from the context, which is the instance of our component. And then finally, we opened an element, so we need to close it. This is really confusing because this is theta in lowercase e.
Demons.
Yeah, they push us to the limits. So this is basically all the code that we need to write in order to simulate, to make this template be created by the renderer. And this is basically it. This is what more or less, this is a little bit simplified version of what Ivy would produce for our component. So since we got the component ready, the only thing we need to do now is to tell Angular to draw it to the screen so we can see it on the right side. And for that, we are going to call yet another never used method, this private render component method, and see how simple it gets. I just need to give it the name of the class, and that's it. It works.
Hey, look at that printer. Look at that cute little printer.
Right, so basically we created a complete working Angular component and render it to the screen without going through the Angular compiler, just by writing like around 20 lines of code. And because we have this ng component def, we basically don't need this decorator anymore, because it actually looks at the ng component def, and the decorator, as I said before, is meaningless. We don't have the compiler here, so nobody is looking at the decorator. So we can remove it, and obviously it still works. Let's give you another emoji. This time it's going to be thumbs up. You know what? You also get a brain, because I think you're smart.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so basically, even with this large font size, I can still fit the entire code into one screen of code that creates the component. And this is the compiled code. I mean, it is simple and approachable, as you can see. And it's not much longer than writing the add component and the template as HTML, only a little bit longer. Questions?
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool because then you can kind of see and understand what's going on under the hood here at this point with our components that we write and we make. And we can also see where, like, I mean, you have this chunk of code here that's also testable and all these other things that come out of it, right? That are pretty amazing.
So do we finally get to talk about the when?
Okay, before the when, just one more thing.
Go, Alyssa.
Basically, you said, Justin said a magic word, testable, and I want to highlight another nice feature that we'll get with Ivy, since what you have seen here is that when we want to compile a component, we basically take this add component decorator that I just removed and translate it to this. This means that eventually, inside our tests, we will be able to define components. So we'll have a function like it should do something. And if we wanted to create a custom component that would wrap our own component, we could write something like a component template, my other component, blah, 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 and create a smaller component just for the purpose of the test. And then I could instantiate its component and do stuff with it. So basically, the decorators will be able to do the compilation of the template into this thing, also at runtime for test purposes. So I will be able to define very small components just for the test case. Or if you use Storybook, you will be able to define small components that just wrap other components and use them in a certain way, inside your stories. So this is basically giving you sort of high order components, because this decorator will actually be a function that takes this class and returns this class with this new ng component def static property. So this will open a lot more possibilities for what we can do when we want to create components or manipulate them in runtime, and not just the usual story of doing this compilation in build time. So this is all still being prototyped, and these are all initial thoughts. But as we speak, I'm starting to see some parallels between Ivy and the way React works. I don't know how many of you are familiar with React, but I think Angular is starting to take some interesting ideas from React, and I would love seeing where this goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Stop screen sharing. I want to see your faces again.
That was really fascinating. That was really cool. It's just such a small little demo, but you showed a lot of cool stuff right there. Everybody needs to make sure they check that out if they missed it.
Yes, do try it at home.
That was pretty cool.
All right, so we didn't really touch on the win, right? Like what's the state right now? We got Angular 7 coming around the corner, right? Like what can we expect right now? And
you guys are ruthless.
Flag, right? Yeah, I tried to get away with it, but
I just don't know. Like, can we expect? Like, was it ever promised for 7 or no? Do we know?
So we are JavaScript developers. We like promises, but I think
but we get observables instead. Oh well.
Well, remember, they're trying to make it backward compatible, and they're trying to make sure that we don't have to change anything. So
I'm going to take that.
We should be patient. I mean, that's worth waiting for. So we don't have to refactor anything. That's
so.
Stefan wants to know if we can share the link for that stack blitz. Can you send it to Justin, and Justin can post it? Only Justin can, Stefan, because Justin is special.
So I will just share the link to my blog post, and there is the same stack blitz and then a better version of it in my blog post with all the instructions how to recreate it.
So Justin already posted that one in the chat, so all you have to do is scroll up.
All right, perfect. And if you want a nice exercise, you can take that example that I have in the blog post and change the name to read Alisa Printer Thumbs Up Rain. So getting back to the when, I think the latest promise regarding release schedules was given after AngularJS 1.2 was out. And basically, the Angular team promised to us that they will never make any promises regarding to release dates again. Because I don't know if you remember, but AngularJS 1.2 was really anticipated, and they had to push back the release date over and over again. So
Oh, trust
right
me,
now,
we remember.
you do remember.
We remember.
ng repeat, you are still haunted by the ng repeat.
Yeah.
So right now we do have a predictable release schedule, but it doesn't mean that we know when features are going to come in, because we know we are going to get a new release every new 6 months, but features will only be enabled once they are stable. And as Alex from the team told to me, it will be ready when it will be ready, and not the moment before that. So only when they feel, as Bonnie said, it's totally bulletproof and a safe upgrade, and they have all the story for upgrading, we'll get it. The thing is, I think they deserve a really big shout out, because they are working hard to make our applications better without us even noticing. And I think almost nobody does it in this industry. All of, or most of the other libraries, when they grow, they make breaking changes. Sometimes they don't even document what was the change, and then you upgrade and you have these strange bugs and you have to hunt them down. So here, I think they are doing it really carefully, and it's like they're telling you about it and getting you all excited, or as Shai once said in his talks, they're like a celebrity that just gets a teenage girl really excited and pumped up. But then they don't, I mean, they didn't have to tell us about it. They could have done it secretly and not have us have their eyes upon them. And
I mean, except for the fact that we can see the GitHub, right? Like,
so this is the time to be honest. What was the last time when you checked the commits on the Angular GitHub?
2 days ago.
You're a nerd. What about you, Justin?
There was a reason why your name was picked for this demo, Alyssa. And then the brain, right? Oh.
Yeah.
Alyssa,
So what about
you are quick with those comebacks today. I like it.
Okay, well, we're probably at the end of the show. Almost time to put a closing tag on this thing. So any last thing on Ivy before we get to some picks or anything? Going once, going twice.
A song about Ivy. Pick a song about Ivy.
Justin, I can't let that slide, my man. Put
What?
put a closing tag on it.
No, I love that.
That
Don't
was
you dare.
very.
I loved that.
No, you totally should have put a theta lowercase e on it.
Oh my god!
I don't even think I can say
so
theta.
cool.
Theta?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't even.
All right, let's get to some picks. Anybody got any picks?
I have picks.
All right, go for it.
Do we all have picks? Can I have more? Can I have extra?
Well, maybe other people might have picks, but you're going first. So
Okay, well, I'm going to go really quick because I have multiple picks. So I have to say I have some picks from our YouTube chat because Frederick had some really good questions and comments. And so shout out to Frederick. And Stefan also was in there with the YouTube with some good questions. And he said there's an Angular conference in Amsterdam, March 2019, NGX Amsterdam. And also Hasura.io. I had a guy on NG Houston a couple days because I didn't even know the guy at all. His name was Tanmay Gopal. He actually turned out to be very cool. And so if you like GraphQL, you should go check out Hasura.io. Those are my picks.
Cool. Hey, I got to pick real quick. Can you hold up that pencil? Do you got an eraser on there that was like from when we were in elementary school?
You know what, Justin? That's old school cool. I got to tell you, that's better than any. Yeah, because I write a lot of notes, but I never like I have spiral notebooks full of notes, and it's not like I never go back and ever look at them. But it's because when I write things down, it sticks in my brain. I don't know. It's
are
just
you
a thing.
are you erasing a lot too, or do you just like the big heavy?
I actually do kind of erase a lot because you know what happens when you have all this pencil left, and yeah, you know what, y'all leave me alone.
No, give it a demo. You got to like hold it slow and just show us what this eraser looks like.
I'm trying to find. Look right there. Look at that. That is tragic. That's my London pencil. But like, I still have all this pencil left. But once the eraser's gone, it's dead to me. Like, I don't even.
Bunny, this is what adults use. It's called pen. You just scribble it out if you make a mistake.
Yeah, but then see, if you don't use that eraser head thing that you pop on there, then you don't get the joy of like burning it down and all of a sudden
I mean,
a hole
just
in
in case if I really am having a bad day, then I have the,
Oh, good Lord.
Because sometimes you have to like go learn new things, and sometimes when I'm learning new things, and
hold up that eraser. Hold that eraser.
That's an eraser switchblade.
Y'all leave me alone.
All right.
I use something a little bit different. I got to get mine in there.
All right, Mike, you got picks?
I just use a keyboard. I take digital notes.
Oh, I got it.
Like normal people, I think, in 2018.
I don't know. There's something about writing something down sometimes. It does stick better.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Okay, who else has picks?
I'm going to see a movie tonight. I don't remember which one. I think it's Venom. Is Venom out tonight? I don't know. I'm excited though. I haven't been to the
I don't know. We have Austin here to tell us what's released.
Where is Austin?
Who is Austin?
Austin's
today.
Yeah, we miss Austin. He got a regular job and now he actually has to work for a living.
Okay, Mike, do you have any picks, Mike?
I have no picks, although I will recommend people go back and check out the episode from Tuesday, the Docker. I went back and watched that because I was not able to be on. But yeah, very good conversations with that. And speaking of YouTube,
Dan Wallin.
Yes, Dan Wallin.
Dan Wallin.
That one guy, whatever his name was, Dan Wallin.
But I will also plug Stephen Fluen's demos with Angular. Has a lot of really good content up on that YouTube channel as well.
I have to second that. Stephen Fluen's kind of amazing. Like I always liked him, but I like him more and more each time. He's pretty cool.
Uri, do you have anything that you want to pick?
Yes, actually, two things. So first of all is GeekCon. It's a hackathon Ariella and I participated in this weekend. And the purpose of this hackathon is to build totally useless but cool things. So people build their really amazing things, and I think I will have another blog post about that in the future. But just to give you a quick taste, a cat robot. That's a robot that looks like a cat and follows a laser pointer that you point on the floor, and that's all that it does. And
I really think, I think we need to redefine pointless. Because
I just have to.
That seems like it has a point.
Or you're so much fun. Like you get into the most nerdy, geeky things, but then you make them so much fun that you're just fun. I missed you. I haven't seen you in a while. I'm really glad that you
come to Israel to visit us.
Yeah. It would be worth it. You're so fun.
Agreed.
And then, so more to be thought about GeekCon in another opportunity because there is a lot to tell. And then I think my second pick, let's see if she's here. Ariella, can you come and say hi? 3, 2, 1. Say hi to Ariella.
Hello.
Well,
so how tickled were you with the because she can't hear us.
No, she hasn't got this.
Well, ask her how tickled she was when you use 3D printing to propose. Is that like, and does she think that's charming, or is she a nerd too?
Is she a nerd too? Yes, I think she's a nerd too.
She went to GeekCon with him.
Well, yeah, that's true. I guess so you guys are a match pair.
The ring in the egg. if you liked it.
Of course.
She said she totally.
Oh, congrats.
That
you
is so
guys.
great. Congratulations. She's beautiful. You're beautiful. You guys are adorable.
Y'all
Now
didn't
go
know
make
you
an
could
adorable
put in
baby.
AngularAir and get a love story, right?
This is, I think, the most romantic episode we've ever had.
It is. It is.
Aw.
All right. Well, I guess that's it. We'll end it on that amazing note. So, Uri, thank you very much for taking the time, coming on, sharing this information with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
It was fun. A lot of fun.
All right. We can't wait till next time. All right.
See you next time.
Have a good weekend.
Later.
Bye-bye.